Welcome to the Visionary Fiction Alliance Authors Interview Series. I'm your host, Brad Swift, and it is my pleasure to spend time with other visionary fiction authors on this show. Before I introduce my guest, I'd like to share with you the 5 purposes of the Visionary Fiction Alliance. Number 1, to increase awareness of the genre of visionary fiction. Secondly, to help readers discover, explore, and enjoy visionary fiction. And number 3, to mentor new writers who wish to explore this genre. And number 4, to provide resources for writers of visionary fiction. And number 5, to be a place where readers can find visionary fiction books and can engage in discussions with the authors. Now we have a new website. If you haven't been there in the last couple of months, go check it out at visionaryfictionalliance.com, where you'll find a lot of resources and a growing number of resources as well. Today, my guest is Margaret Duarte, the author of Enter the Between Visionary Fiction series that includes a couple of award-winning books. Between Will and Surrender won first place for the fiction in the 2016 Northern California Publishers and Authors Book Awards competition, and then Between Darkness and Dawn won second place for fiction in the 2018 Northern California Publishers and Authors Book Awards competition. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Hello, Brad. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I've been looking forward to I hate to use this term, but I can't come up with a better one. Pick your brain. We're just going to explore some questions, around what is it to be a visionary fiction author and what is visionary fiction. And as my, listeners of our previous shows probably will recall, I like to start each of our interviews with 2 basic questions to get your take on these. Number 1, how would you define visionary fiction? And secondly, why do you think visionary fiction is so important to our world, particularly today? So let's start with how would you define visionary fiction?
Well, it's hard to define visionary fiction in just a few words.
Yes.
And in a way that encompasses all the different forms of visionary fiction. But I'm going to give it a try.
Okay.
I think that key in defining visionary fiction is the word visionary, which implies openness, receptiveness, and farsightedness. And then visionary fiction uses that openness and farsightedness via symbolism, metaphor, and story to bridge the gap between the material and spiritual realms, where we transcend the boundary of the 5 senses to a place of inner wisdom or ageless perennial wisdom that Carl Jung called the collective unconscious or collective consciousness, and I call the between. And then visionary fiction helps us answer the universal questions of who am I and why am I here? And helps us reach and show what the eyes can't see, but the inner soul can comprehend. So to put it in the simplest terms, visionary fiction makes the soul or our intuitive wisdom perceptible.
Very good. Very well said. It is a challenge. That's one of the reasons I like to start with it, because a lot of people are still just learning that there is a genre on visionary fiction these days. So we want to give people different cuts at, what are we talking about when we talk about visionary fiction? And I think we'd all have to kind of agree that 2020 has started off to be a bit of an unusual ride. So how do you think visionary fiction can really make a difference, and how does it influence today's world?
Well, a lot of popular fiction provides entertainment without substance. And I'm not knocking that kind of fiction and that kind of entertainment, because we all need to escape reality once in a while. But reading fiction without substance on a regular basis is like eating too much candy. It tastes great, but it doesn't provide much nourishment. So as we speak, we're facing the coronavirus pandemic, and no fictional hero is going to come save us. Instead, we're going to have to rely on our own power and wisdom to make it through. And that's where visionary fiction comes in. Visionary fiction restores our forgotten relationship with the spiritual, which we have all but lost in the busyness of contemporary life. And borrowing from ancient teachings, visionary fiction helps us face the tests and obstacles that stretch us physically, mentally, and spiritually. So I would say there's a lot to be said for supplementing what we know or what we think we know with the knowledge of those who have trekked the path before us.
Yeah, very good, very good. And we're going to, in a moment, get into this whole thing about your title series this itself, which I think is quite fascinating. But before we do that, let me ask you a little bit about, when did you first realize that this genre of visionary fiction existed, and what led you to write visionary fiction? And I want to kind of say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you know there was visionary fiction and you decided you want to write it, or did you start writing the series and discovered later that, oh my gosh, I've been writing visionary fiction all along? How did that happen?
I probably would not have chosen to write visionary fiction if I would have known, how this would turn out. But my first book more or less welled out of me with no thought to genre at all. And then when that flow slowed to a trickle and I had to start the revision process, I was forced to consider my work through the viewpoint of publishers and marketers, which led to a brick wall with a sign that said, "No admittance without genre ID." So that forced me to go on a hunt, focusing on such mainstream genres as women's fiction, magical realism, even commercial fiction. But none of the genres fit what I had written. So in 2002, I came across a book called Spiritual Writing, and inside was an article by Hal Zana Bennett called Visionary Fiction, Rediscovering Ancient Paths to Truth. And I'm going to read just a little section of it real quick. He says, "Good visionary fiction takes us deep into the realm of mystery, beyond the boundaries of our five senses. Here we discover truths that exist outside time and outside the finite boundaries of our singular lives. Here we encounter universal wisdom that lets us see beyond our own conflicts and passions, raising our hope that we might transcend our limited perceptions, if only momentarily, and find comfort in greater truths." I could go on, but that's all I'm good. But his definition of visionary fiction so closely matched what I was writing that I believed my work had finally found a home. But then came another piece of bad news. On searching for publishing opportunities, visionary fiction was rarely mentioned as something that agents and publishers were looking for. Most mainstream publishers were hesitant to read anything that called itself visionary fiction, certain that it would be religious and that the author would sermonize. So I joined with some other visionary fiction writers led by Jodine Turner and started a website called the Visionary Fiction Alliance. And as they say, the rest is history.
Right. And an unfolding history as we speak itself, because we've got now, gosh, I don't know, you probably know better than I do, over 100 other visionary fiction authors that are part of the Alliance. Is that correct?
And every time a new one comes in and writes to us, they say they also feel they finally found a home.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was exactly my situation. I'm not that different from yours. I started realizing I was writing, different types of genres and wanted to write more that were not just entertaining like you were speaking about, but also that left people thinking about the story and the characters and maybe some lessons, and maybe were inspired. And then that's when I started looking for, and I started calling myself a visionary author, just thinking I had come up with something, brand new. And then I discovered Visionary Fiction Alliance, shortly thereafter by Googling it, so yeah, very good. So you share a little bit about how this first story came about. So did you know from the beginning that this was going to be a series, or did that kind of grow organically?
At the beginning, I didn't even think I was going to finish the first book. I did not know how hard. I finished it in 3 months, actually, but it took me 14 years to get it to the point where I was proud enough to, and I believed it was ready for publication. And after that book, I said, I cannot do this again. But I realized the story wasn't over. Yeah. So I wrote book 2 and said, I cannot do this again. And then I realized the story wasn't finished. I needed a book 3 and a book 4 because my character follows the Native American medicine wheel teachings. And there are actually 7 paths, but the main 4 are the one I dealt with in my series. And I could not leave her halfway through the path. She had to finish steps 3 and 4, books 3 and 4.
Okay, very good, very good. So just to let other writers of visionary fiction, just because you get a book written in 3 months, it doesn't necessarily going to take you 14 years to get it revised. But in some cases it can, so one might think, Margaret, were you a little bit of a perfectionist during that time, or was it really? I taught English and I taught composition. I would say yes, I'm a perfectionist. And something about visionary fiction, it's not just plot. I couldn't just throw it out there. I had a lot of research to do when it came to the Native American medicine wheel, when it came to quantum physics, when it came to explaining my character starts to hear voices. Now, is she losing her mind? Or can there be a reasonable explanation for this? Is it an illness, or is it an opening? And I wanted to make this as realistic as possible, as believable as possible. And actually, I think it is believable that a person can sometimes hear and see things that we don't normally do. We believe it when it comes to the Bible, and when it comes to saints and prophets. Why not an average everyday person? Why could it not happen to her? But it took a lot of research for me to understand and believe it, and then for the reader to believe it. What is it? Who was it that said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, or whatever? I had to feel it and believe it in order to pass that on to my readers. So it took a long time. The second, third, and fourth books went faster. That's good. That's good. Well, we all do hopefully learn from each writing experience, even though they're not, very rarely are the same, but they are something we can apply to the next book and the next book. And I think this is a good time to really look into this whole thing that you named the series Enter the Between. So kind of hinted to what that meant when you were talking about your research. So let's kind of delve into that a little bit more. What are you actually referring to there?
And remember, each one of my books, the word between is in it. Between will and surrender, between darkness and dawn, between yesterday and tomorrow, and between now and forever. The between. Let me start with the question. What do we do when life throws us a slider, like our current situation with COVID-19? Do we criticize? Do we despair? Do we suffer through it? Or do we take a different route by finding meaning in the experience and consider it a transpersonal or transformational pathway to self? Now, some names for this pathway to self are PSI field, the zone, as athletes call it, the quantum field, the collective unconscious, and I call that the between. The between is a place of inner knowledge and breakthrough experiences, where the gates of the mind are pushed ajar, making room for threshold experiences. And we cross into the between through surrender, letting go of our task-oriented, controlling self and following our instincts. And then slowly, like my character, with my character and us in real life, while facing the obstacles in the between, shock can turn into curiosity. And then we realize there's something bigger and deeper going on in our lives.
Yeah, very good. I'd like to nominate one other name for it that I think you and I spoke about in our preliminary conversation, and that was the Twilight Zone. I believe you kind of acknowledge that's also one of the ways to kind of refer to it. Our, I think, a favorite show of mine many, many years ago was the original, Twilight Zone, that started to kind of delve into these questions of what is it like to travel to, in the between itself.
Mm-hmm.
What, again, we've been talking a little bit about the coronavirus. Now we're recording this, in the very first part of April. So we're right in the midst of this, whole thing that's, far from over. What role do you see that this coronavirus could play to open the collective mind and consciousness of the planet itself?
Well, I'll bring in my first novel, which deals with the delicate relationship between willfulness and willingness, between will and surrender. Will represents what we in the West so value, and it's probably making it difficult for us right now during the situation we're in. It represents mastery, self-determination, security, the objective, the secular, and the mind. Whereas surrender is something we value less in the West. We even shun. But that is really the path to which our inner wisdom emerges, through mystery, dependence, vulnerability, the subjective, the spiritual, and the soul. Faced with our current coronavirus pandemic, we're hit with a sudden awareness that we can't master our destiny through willpower alone. Our power and wisdom lie beyond our personal will. Instead, we have to dig deep inside of ourselves for the answers that we already know. In other words, our power and wisdom lie in our willingness to look at the world through different eyes. And right now, we do not have a choice. We are pushed out of our comfort zone, but in a way, it's a place where we can unwind and maybe reach down into ourselves and discover what our soul is whispering to us.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's interesting. Just a couple of weeks before this interview, a good friend of mine, actually my daughter's partner, very unexpectedly, lost his job. And, on the individual level, that's one of those, moments that can really have people step back and say, okay, what's the universe trying to tell me here? And, within a few days, less than 2 weeks, literally, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs. So again, there's this collective movement of, okay, all of a sudden you've got all this extra time. You can't do what you've been frenetically putting on your to-do, statement. And so now there's this opening at a cosmic level that I don't think we've ever faced.
I don't know if you ever read the last words of Steve Jobs. He had a last words on his deathbed, and I have some of it highlighted here. And it says, I realize that all the accolades and riches of which I was once so proud have become insignificant with my imminent death. And he goes on beautifully saying, don't wait until it's too late. And I think we can call what's happening now a big giant wake-up call. You know, I used to wonder how my mom and dad made it through World War II in Holland when Hitler invaded their country, and family and friends died of starvation, where family they would be shot for no reason if they left home. We talk about staying home just to prevent catching a disease. In those days, they had to stay home to prevent being shot and killed. I wondered how they survived it. And now on a small scale, I'm starting to understand.
Yeah.
Just do what you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, let's turn a little bit of our focus over to the actual process of writing. Now, I've read some of your first book, and your main character, Marjorie Vale, I believe her name is. How much of her journey is in some ways autobiographical, or has been part of your own spiritual journey into the between?
My mother, that's the only book she lived long enough to read, the first one. And when she was finished reading it, she cried and said, I didn't know you until I read this book. There were 10 of us. So it's hard for a mother to actually know all 10 children. So I assume a lot of me is in there. But I think it was my own fight for personal and emotional freedom. Being in a large family maybe started it. You know, and then studying and college and religion and everything, it kind of forced me into this little box, which I wanted to escape. I'm sure everybody goes through that at some point in their life. So yes, I would say it's got a lot of biographical in it. Yeah.
If we can't borrow from our own lives as visionary fiction authors, you know, who can? You know, really. You know, I started. You know, this past year I wrote my next visionary fiction book, the Fringe Candidate. You can see it's back here over his shoulder, and you know, it flowed. It's a little bit like what you're saying. It just flowed out of me, and part of the reason it flowed so well was the main character. I wrote it in the first person, and I believe your book is also, you know, books is in the first person, and the character is a kind of a resigned, cynical talk show host. And I realized as I was writing it, again, it needed to be visionary fiction, so there had to be a transformation. I wanted that to be in there. So he had to start out as somewhat of a jerk. Actually, he was quite a jerk. And so that he had some place to transform to. And I was shocked and more than a little dismayed how easy it was to write the jerkiness of this guy, because it was, you know, taken from my own times that I've been a jerk. So, you know, autobiographical is completely fair game as far as I'm concerned. Now,
and another point.
Sure.
Another point. I have one character in there that was, can I use the word bitch?
Yeah.
But she was fun to write, because I was able to say everything that I wouldn't dare say in public.
Yeah.
So she was fun. So let's hope that your character too represented the part of you that you would love to once in a while just let it go, let it out.
Yeah, and not only would love, but have done it in times past that I'm, you know, a little embarrassed to say. But, you know, again, we've all are on our own journey of transformation itself. So, you know, it's fair game to borrow from that. Now, if you could tell your younger writing self, like maybe even the person back there who got this idea to write this book that, you know, just flowed out of you, what would you tell that person now?
I would tell that person to be less willful and more willing.
Mm.
To to quit trying to control the story and let the story tell itself, and let that inner consciousness that really knows the story to talk. I think it would have taken me a lot less time if I would have been less controlling. I also wish I would have started earlier. I didn't start writing until I was 50 years old.
Mm.
In high school, I received awards for some of the stuff I handed in, mostly for extra credit, because in high school and college, very rarely were we asked to write fiction. But if you wrote a little fictional story and handed it in as extra credit, it usually got accepted. And the teachers actually published them twice, two of the stories I wrote. And in college, one of the teachers said, "I expect you to become a writer." And then it took me until I was 50 to actually do so. So I wish I would have started earlier.
Start earlier. Okay, very good. So those who are younger, or even at 40, start. That's
Start.
one of the first things I tell people. Is they say, "Well, what does it take to be a writer?" I said, "Well, it starts by putting your butt in the chair and starting to write." And it just doesn't get any further than that. And I know, I think it was Ray Bradbury that once said, the first million words don't count anyway. So now, I don't know that that's true now in today's age, but the idea is to go ahead and start. So now you mentioned before that you had done a fair amount of research around the medicine wheel and all that. So tell us a little bit about how does that process go for you, and when did you know you had enough research and to get on with the writing process?
The initial research, because I had no idea what I was going to write about, and I went to, when we still had a Borders in town back then, and I kept being drawn towards the metaphysical section, but there was very little fiction there except for Paulo Coelho and what's his name, Redfield, James Redfield.
Yeah.
But I found some awesome stuff in the nonfiction area, which actually two of the books that got me started were The Medicine Way
Mm-hmm.
and Earth Medicine by Kenneth Meadows. And that got me started, gave me structure to the story. But research, I find, I would do as I went along and needed it.
Yeah.
I ended up, because I talk a lot about nature, my 4 books, I'm a farm girl, so nature is very important to my stories. But I needed to study the California Pacific Northwest Field Guide. I needed to the Farmer's Almanac, The Natural History of Big Sur, Silicon Valley Handbook. I got these all written down. Precious Stones and Minerals and Gems, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. Witchcraft, Alzheimer's disease. Every book required research on a different subject. The Labyrinth. I had to study hospitals and hospital care. I had to study the monarch butterfly and so on. So in the mornings, I would do my research and taking notes in my journals. And during my long walks, every day I try to walk 3 miles, I would take some index cards with me and jot down ideas that came to me. And then in the afternoons, well, usually from 10 to 1 and maybe a little bit in the afternoon, I would just write my stories. But
Yeah.
the research came as I went.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because otherwise you can end up researching it forever and almost research the life right out of the actual story itself. So very good. That's excellent advice as well. Now, I want to thank you for our conversation today. And I also want our viewers to know where they can find more information about you and also your books. Now, I happen to have noticed on Amazon that all 4 of the books have 5-star ratings. And I think that's pretty commendable. And I think it really speaks to balancing the research that you did, and that sometimes it's actually okay to be a perfectionist. So, because it pays off in the long run. But where can they find out more about you, and where can they find your books?
Well, my website is margaretdory.com.
Okay.
So that pretty much not only tells about me and my journey, because I have different areas that tell, but also leads you straight to my books. All you have to do is click a link and it'll take you straight, which book 1 is on Amazon. And most recently, it's been spread all over because of the award it won. It just won California Author Project, the first place award for adult fiction. And part of the requirement for that was that it's available to libraries and available everywhere. So I had to stretch that one out. And the other ones I'm slowly stretching out, but right now they're only available on Amazon.
Okay, very good. So Amazon is for the whole series, and you can start with the first book. You might even find it at a library, or certainly once we are back able to get out into the public with everybody else, you can always go to your library and say, can you order that book for me as well? So
yes.
Very good. Okay, I want to thank you again, Margaret, for joining us for this Visionary Fiction Alliance authors interview. And I'm going to let you go. And in a minute, we'll be back to go over today's Right on Purpose coaching tip. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Margaret.
Thanks for what you do, Brad.
You're welcome. Welcome back. Today's interview is sponsored by Right on Purpose Coaching. And here's today's Right on Purpose coaching tip. Now, I'd like for us to start by exploring a popular myth known as writer's block. You may say, what? Myth? Yes, myth. That's what I say. Now, a way to think of this is that writer's block is a misbelief that many writers have, especially new writers or aspiring authors. So let's take a look at this. First, consider that writer's block, well, it isn't real. In other words, you won't find a block out there somewhere in the world with the words writer's block on it, no matter how many rocks you look under. Consider further that what we describe as writer's block is really just a set of conversations that we tell ourselves that serve to keep us from writing, and that the most powerful ones operate in the background of our awareness most of the time, so that we don't even have access to them. They become that kind of part of the background noise that we call our thoughts. Now, there's another component of these that we'll only touch on here, but that is that many of these thoughts also initiate powerful emotions and feelings. So this combination of the thoughts and the emotions can be quite disempowering and keep us from what we're really committed to. In other words, you might think of this example. We have a whole bunch of thoughts about all the things that we've got to, be doing in our life. And so this initiates a feeling of overwhelm, which then becomes a great justification not to take on another project, such as writing the next great American novel or nonfiction book. You see how devious these internal conversations can be. So then the question is, well, what do we do about it? How do we break through this self-imposed wall, as it were? Well, start by bringing those conversations from the background of your awareness up to the foreground. Now, let's look at one more piece of this puzzle before I call forth a call to action coaching assignment. So you ready for this next piece? Consider that these conversations actually do affect our reality over time. Our lives take on the shape of those behind the scene conversations. They are like a self-fulfilling prophecy that reinforce. Again, for example, I don't have time to write may take the shape in reality as, well, there's no time in your calendar blocked out for writing. So you get to justify that your thought, I don't have time to write, is actually accurate. So here's your call to action assignment. Look closely over this next week at the conversations that you tell yourself whenever you think about starting your book or your short story or your article, whatever it is you think that you want to write. Capture as many of these conversations down as you can. Write them down. That's a starting point right there, because now you're writing, right? Then look to see how they have ended up shaping your reality out in the world, and write that down as well. Okay, so that's today's Write on Purpose coaching tip. Until next time, have an outstanding day as you express your life purpose with passion and play. Take care.